Hi, everyone. I think that it's about time that we start this webinar. I'm happy to see you all here. My name is Maria Azzurri, and I am Associate Professor at the Business School of Western Norway University of Applied Sciences in Norway. And my research interests are in the intersection of geography of innovation, sustainability transitions. And this webinar today is part of the CREST Cities and Regions for Sustainability Transitions webinar series that brings together researchers of different stages of career to showcase their work on different topics. And today, it is the second of the two special webinars in which we collaborate with TRAKR, that stands for Transformative Knowledge Regions network, funded by Regional Studies Association. We will hear some words about it in a while, and but before we begin, I would like to say a few words about our great host, the Regional Studies Association, or RSA. The RSA is the global interdisciplinary network for urban and regional research development policy. It supports its members with the latest research, funding schemes, network, and publishing opportunities and spaces to grow research and careers. It holds also webinars to support its members and the community. For example, the Professional Development Series and the RSA International R. From these webinars, you can find the recordings in the RSA Lounge. For this year, the Regional Studies Association Annual Conference takes place in Florence, in Italy, from 11th to 14th of June, and we're looking forward to seeing you there. And at this point, I would like to introduce to you Luis Carvalho from University of Porto, who is going to say some words about the TRAKR network.
Thank you, Maria, for your very nice introduction, for giving us the opportunity, of course, to join forces with CREST with your webinar series. Well, I'm Luis Carvalho, as you said, from the University of Porto, and I'm the co-organizer of the RSA Research Network on Transformative Knowledge Regions. And I do this with Hugues Jonnerad and Pauline Lavonchy from the University of Neuchâtel, with Anna Butzin and Kirsten Meyer from the Westphalian University of Applied Sciences, and with Jesper Manisch from the Center for Regional and Tourism Research, Bornholm. I can say that our research network was started in 2023 with an eye to explore and deepen our understanding on the role of knowledge as an asset for regional development on the face of sustainability transitions. If you are curious, you can find more information on our network and on previous events on the RSA webpage, and also through the link that will be displayed in the chat of this webinar. This is actually the fourth event in our network. Well, we started last year with a kickoff paper session in the RSA annual conference in Ljubljana. We had a follow-up conceptual seminar in Gelsenkirchen last year. And last month, we had our first methods webinar, where we discussed some methodological approaches for qualitatively exploring how can transformative knowledge dynamics develop and anchor in different regions. I would say that in today's webinar, we are seeking to discuss how to quantify and how to measure the transformative knowledge potential of regions, and also to see how can we study structures and patterns of transformation across time and space. Just before giving you back the word, Maria, I would like also to advertise a bit our next forthcoming presential workshop that will take place in Bornholm in Denmark. It will be organized by Jesper Manisch. You will say a few words about that in the end of our webinar. And it will take place on the 3rd and on the 4th of October. So you might wish to save the date if you are interested to join. This will be an opportunity to discuss empirical material related to the topics of our network and to discuss also some publication opportunities related with that. Well, I think it's now time to give the word back to Maria and to our very nice speakers. So thank you very much again for co-hosting this webinar with us, and I'm very much looking forward to the discussions.
Thank you very much, Luis. But before we start with the talks, I should mention a bit of general information to make you aware. This webinar is consisting of two parts, like the previous one. The first part is we'll have two presentations, and I would like to know that for those who use social networks, please use the hashtag RSA webinar to tweet about the event. The webinar, I have informed that the webinar is being recorded and will be made public. So in case you don't want to be in the picture, please switch off your camera. The second part is in the format of a workshop. Following the presentations, there will be a short break, and the second part of the session during the second part of the session, we will divide in to breakout rooms. There will be one breakout room for its keynote presentation, and I have to note here that there will be no recording of the breakout rooms. So this webinar will last approximately 3 hours. And having said all this, I would like to introduce you our presenters. The first one is Sebastian Losacker from the Department of Geography at the University of Giessen. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing well names. He holds a PhD in geography from University of Hanover, and his interests are also in the intersection of geography, of innovation, and transition studies. Then we will have a talk by Nika Murovec and Tjaša Bartolj. Nika is a senior researcher at the Institute of Economic Research in Ljubljana, and her research work has mostly been focused on the analysis of different aspects of innovation, with emphasis on human resources, knowledge transfer, creativity, and sustainability, while Tjaša is a research fellow at the Institute of Economic Research and lecturer at the University of Ljubljana, and her work focuses primarily on labor and educational economics. So having said this, Sebastian, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks a lot, Maria, for introducing me and for sharing. Right, so as you said, my name is Sebastian. I'll talk a bit about what we call a geographical sequence analysis today, and I hope it will help us understand how to empirically track transformative knowledge capacities across time and space. Before starting with the general talk, I would like to show you this picture of this very beautiful carpet. Don't worry about me getting crazy. It's probably also the very first presentation that you ever saw with someone showing a picture of a carpet. It will make more sense during the presentation. I will get back to that carpet. I just want you to, for now, have at least a look at the carpet and think about what you can see. And I mean, it's quite obvious that there's a lot of chaos in there. It's not really any patterns that you could observe. But if you think about how that carpet has been produced, it indeed might have been some kind of underlying patterns that have led to how the carpet looks like currently. But for now, you can forget about the carpet again. I will, as I said, come back to that issue a bit later. And then it might make a bit more sense why I showed you that picture. So the plan for today, I'm going to talk about these three aspects more or less. So I will, of course, explain to you what sequence analysis and what geographical sequence analysis actually is. I will also talk a bit about why I think it is very useful for the research we do in economic geography, regional studies, innovation, transition studies, and all the related fields that you probably all work on. And at the end, I will try to link it to the topic of that network and of the webinar, which is transformative knowledge and transformative knowledge regions. So I will just showcase a bit how I think it can be useful to study transformative knowledge across time and space. For the background, so this presentation is based on a couple of empirical papers that I've been working on with different colleagues in the past years. 3 of them are more empirical and 1 is more like a manual. The very first one has just been published a couple of weeks ago together with Hendrik Hansmeier, where we use sequence analysis to study how eco-innovations evolve in different German regions over time. Another paper that we are working on using these sequencing techniques is currently under review with Anne Otto and also Hendrik Hansmeier again, where we study the regional relatedness density and industrial complexity of regions in Germany and how that changed over time, also using these sequencing measures. And the third empirical paper that I list here is currently in preparation. I'm working on that together with my colleague Lucas Krisch, and also from the Trabi team, and then colleagues from France, where we try to understand different pathways towards the bioeconomy, and we use global patent data for that. I will briefly showcase you a bit what we do in that paper at the end of the presentation. The main part of this talk, however, is based on a paper that we published some weeks ago, Andreas Kübert and I, where we basically introduce sequence analysis to the field of economic geography. And most of the things that I will now tell you about sequence analysis can also be found in more detail in the paper. Okay, before I start explaining what sequence analysis actually is, I think we should all take a moment and think about why should we even care about that novel method. I think there is a lot of arguments why we should do that. First of all, I think we can all agree on the fact that in economic geography, in regional studies and related fields, in the past decades or so, we had this consensus that history matters for our understanding of how regions change over time. So having this evolutionary approach is very helpful for us to see and understand the economic system across space, right? So this is kind of the idea where we start from. And you could even put it in a bit more like friendly words, and you could say, okay, evolutionary economic geography and other like evolutionary approaches in regional studies, they offer a framework that not only enables us to say that time and history matter, but also how they matter. And this is a quote that I took from a very nice paper by Martin Henning, published in Regional Studies a couple of years ago, where he basically made this point about evolutionary economic geography really helping us to understand regional economic development. In that very same paper, however, Henning also emphasizes that there is a need for advancing then the empirical work in evolutionary economic geography. So in that paper, he also says that the consistent empirical treatment of longitudinal patterns of regional economic evolution has, with a couple of exceptions, escaped the core focus of the EEG. So, and this is what I really use as a starting point of thinking about why we should maybe think about using novel methods to advance then also the empirical work we do in EEG, and not just focus on the concept that we have been working on in the last decades. So I think based on that there's a need for novel methods in evolutionary economic geography in particular, but also regional studies more broadly, that can actually then acknowledge the importance of time and history in a proper sense. And this holds especially for quantitative methods. I brought another quote from Andrew Abbott, who was kind of the pioneer in sequencing analysis. And this by now very old quote still, in my view, holds for major parts of the evolutionary economic geography research strand. And he said that there are a lot of literatures where processes of obvious conceptual importance, but where empirically no one has moved beyond the recipes of regressions. And on that point, I would actually agree. So what we do in, kind of these entry-exit models of regional diversification is basically we look at panel data sets, and then we include time-fixed effects that might not be the best way of thinking about how to incorporate time and history in our empirical analysis in quantitative terms. So what can we do about that then? So I think, of course, we don't have to reinvent the wheel in economic geography. We're a small discipline, but I think it's very helpful to look into other fields and try to learn from them. And this certainly has a great tradition in regional studies and economic geography. So just think about social network analysis, that now it's kind of a standard tool that we use in many research, for many research questions in our field. Think about survival analysis and other econometric techniques more generally that we also now use, that of course come from other fields in the economic sciences. Think about QCA, so qualitative comparative analysis, that has been introduced by Rutten a couple of years ago and is now also frequently used in regional studies. Other methods include the AHP, which is more like an evaluation tool, and that has also been applied to regional studies. And I think sequence analysis could be part of that list in the future, as an example of how we can borrow methods from fields that have used that method for a long time now, to help us then advance research in our field. Okay, so now I talked enough about why we should use it. Now let me explain what sequence analysis actually is. First of all, sequence analysis should not be understood as a single method or a tool. It's more like a set of methods. And it originates from bioinformatics to analyze DNA strings, which is also, of course, then the reason why it's called sequence analysis. And as I said earlier, it has been introduced by Andrew Abbott in particular to the social sciences. And sequence analysis now is really a well-established method in sociology and education and employment research. So there's a huge community around that method. There's a sequence analysis association working internationally. But this kind of method has mostly been used, of course, given the establishment in sociology, to study career path, for example, of individuals, or different things on the level of an individual person, but it has not really been applied to the regional level so far. So sequence analysis, in a nutshell, it processes categorical longitudinal data, and a single sequence refers to an ordered states for each unit of observation that we have in our data set. So you can then put that more formally, and you can say that a state sequence, so a sequence of particular states with a length of L, is a kind of an ordered list of elements, L elements, which we call states from a chosen set, which we call the alphabet. So as such, a sequence can also then be denoted as a vector of states, basically, over time. So what are these kind of states that I've been talking about? As I said, it's categorical variables, so it's mutually exclusive factors, and each state covers a specific period of time. So it's kind of, think of it as a panel data set with categorical variables, more or less. And then the position of each state provides us information on the absolute or relative period of time within the respective sequence and in between all sequences in the data set, so in between all other units of observations that we have. So if you think about it more like in these visual terms, this is how a sequence would look like. So you have your unit of observation, which in most cases has always been an individual, so person, but which in our case, I think could also be a region or could be knowledge. And that then for this observation, we track basically the evolution over time. So we study the whole sequence of what has happened to that unit of observation by assessing a state to each unit of time for that unit of observation. And this is what we then call a sequence as a whole. If you now think about how we can use that in geographic research, it's kind of possible in two very broad ways. So you could think of using this kind of data format to the level of regions, of places. So having the unit of observation as a region, for example, as a territory. And Andreas Kübern and I, we call that a territory-based sequence analysis. So we can then track, for example, for a specific region, how that region has evolved over time. And then we can, of course, do that for a lot of regions and then compare how these regional trajectories compare to each other. We could also think, on the other hand, about an entity-based sequence analysis, where the unit of observation is not a spatial unit, so a region, a place, a territory, but it's maybe another thing. So for example, knowledge, or it could be a good, and then the state would provide information on the geography, or so on the spatial part. So for example, you can think about tracing the movement of entities in space over time. So just think about how knowledge maybe diffuses in space. if we have this kind of data, so like a panel data set of categorical variables for a couple of units of observations of over time, there are, of course, a lot of potential pitfalls. For the spatial dimension, that's quite obvious for us as geographers. So, of course, there's problems that relate to spatial autocorrelation, with units of observations being correlated to each other. Of course, we have issues facing the modifiable area unit problem. So the results in the end of the sequence analysis will depend on how we define our spatial unit. But we also face a lot of problems with the temporal dimension. This has also been discussed in great detail in the paper by Martin Henning that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So this temporal dimension features a problem similar to the modifiable area unit problem, which is the modifiable period problem. So if at one point we need to think what actually is a period of time for our analysis. And then, of course, in relation to that, we also have a temporal boundary problem. So now let me explain how that territory-based GCA would look like, which could also be framed as a time and space analysis. So think about, for example, 3 regions as a unit of observation, and these 3 regions, they can have these 3 states in a very, very simple fashion. So the region can have like a successful cluster or a declining cluster, or it can be in a cluster lock-in situation. Very, very easy example. And then you can, for each region, track how the state has changed over time. For example, the first region in that example would be a successful regional cluster for the first couple of periods, and then after time, there's a decline and it changes the state, and in the end, it has this lock-in situation. And then you can do that for, of course, not only these 3 regions, but for your whole data set. If you think about an entity-based geographical sequence analysis, I will not focus on that in this presentation, but I just brought an example of how you could use it from my colleague Andreas Kübert. He used this entity-based GCA to study how startups in Berlin have changed their location over time. So basically, he tracked startups as the unit of observation, and he tried to understand how these startups changed their location over time, basically, and then he came up with explanations on why that happened. This is kind of a very nice example of how you can then use the spatial dimension within the state of the sequence analysis and not as the unit of observation. But for now, I will focus on the territory-based one. So for the next maybe 5 to 10 minutes, I will explain how to use it, the territory-based GCA, with the probably easiest example that you could think of in economic geography. So what we do here is we have data with Andreas Kübert on like 1,000 European NUTS 3 regions, basically on the regional employment composition. So for each region, we know for the years 2001 to 2020, kind of the composition of the primary, secondary, and tertiary sectors. So employment shares in agriculture, manufacturing, and services. If you think about this, so kind of the very easiest data that you can imagine to have in economic geography. And if you think about a region then, and how the sector composition looks like in that region, you can imagine that to be in this kind of triangle, right? So you can set a dot in that triangle for each region and then compare how the sector share differs depending on the share of employment in each of these three sectors. You can do that, for example, for the first year, for 2001. Here we put in all these 1,000 regions, and then you can see how the sector share differs between regions. You can also, of course, then do that for all the other years, which in our case, we do here just for showing you for 2020. And there you can see, basically, if you compare these 2 figures, that there has been a lot of change. So in a nutshell, regions have moved towards more the top right part of that triangle. So basically, this is obvious, of course, regions have over time become more oriented towards service industries, towards manufacturing, leaving more the agricultural side. So basically showing the Fourier type of economic development model that everyone, of course, has in mind if he or she thinks about economic development. So what we do now, we use these small triangles within this big triangle, which is called a ternary diagram, as a state for our sequence analysis. So we look for each region and each year in which kind of mini triangle that region is located. For example, we do that here now for 10 regions. And you can see for the first row, basically each row is one region. You can see that that very first region has started with this more blue colored state, so having already high share of service sectors, but then eventually increased the share of service industry employment and then moved towards that purple state more or less. And this is kind of similar in many other of these regions as well. So it's kind of a very, very easy example of how we can track this evolution of regions with that kind of understandable and easy employment data. But for 10 sequences, I mean, it's not really helpful then to display it as a sequence. You could also just have a look at the data, right? And at the actual sector shares. It becomes more meaningful if you look at the whole picture. So this is kind of what the sequence plot looks like if we plot in every region as a line for all these 1,000 regions. And then in the end, it's a very chaotic picture, right? So you can basically, if you have a look at it, if you would zoom in, you could track for each region how the state has changed over time. Now I try to come back to the carpet. It's very much a very similar picture. So if you look at it, it's very chaotic. You cannot really see much. There's a lot of, kind of chaotic color arrangements and patterns. But if you think about that there's maybe an underlying pattern that can be studied, then it's kind of very close to what I told in the beginning about the carpet. So now our task is to then really disentangle all these sequences and try to find the underlying patterns that help us explain how regions have changed over time. So for example, the very thing we can do with this kind of sequence data is we can just sort this sequence plot that I showed you here in the left panel by the very first state or by the last state, and then we can see more or less how maybe the share of each state has changed over time. And there we see a very obvious picture that, of course, as we would expect as economic geographers, the share of regions having this very purple state has, of course, increased over time. So regions have become more oriented towards a service economy. We can then also do that kind of as a state distribution plot. So we can look at how the share of each state has changed over time, basically. And there we get the same picture. So it's, of course, services have increased over time, which is kind of why I used that example, because it's so easy to understand. We can also compute kind of an entropy measure, which tells us about the concentration of regions across all these possible states. And here we can see that there's a slight increase, which provides us information on the fact that regions have become more concentrated towards a few couple of states over time, which in our case then is that very purple state, which is a large a tertiary employment. And the more interesting thing we can do now with sequence analysis is we can compare each sequence to one another by using an optimal matching technique, which is basically you assign costs for changes of each state, and then you can derive like a distance matrix, more or less, that tells you how similar or dissimilar one regional sequence is to another. And then you can run a basic hierarchical clustering algorithm that helps you then come up with a kind of cluster typology of different regional developmental paths. Here, I mean, what we can see from that example is and that there's, of course, not too many changes happening. So if you look at the cluster number 4, for example, there you see, okay, that's all regions that have been, these service economies for the whole kind of period. But then you can also see some of these clusters telling us a very interesting story. For example, if you look at the third cluster there, you can really see that Fourastier economic development model, where regions have kind of increased their share of tertiary employment over time. And this then is kind of helpful to filter out these regions that had these more like trajectories that might be interesting for us to continue with a more in-depth analysis. You can, of course, then also plot these clusters by state distribution, which then also tells you a lot about how each cluster looks like in terms of the composition of each state. And you can, of course, as I did with the whole plot, sort by first state and by last state. And there you can also, again, for the third one, see very much that Forestier development model, where regions have left these more manufacturing and agricultural-based employment situations towards more service economy. So as I said, it's probably the easiest example that you could imagine, but I think it's very helpful to use it to explain what you can do with sequence analysis methods. Of course, we can then also put these clusters back on a map. And this also, I mean, is telling us a story that we would expect. For example, if you look at the distribution of clusters 5 and 6, which are regions that have for most of their time had a high share of agriculture and manufacturing. Of course, these are more, can be found in eastern and southern parts of Europe. So you can also then try to understand the geography of that by mapping these different types of clusters. All right, as I said, we wrote about how to use that in that paper in Progress in Economic Geography. And just to do a bit more advertisement on that, we also published a manual on that, where we published the R code, which is completely reproducible. So you can try to do that sequence analysis on your own, also use your own data set. It's very easy to learn, and we try to help you with that by providing this online manual and code. All right, so now let's think about how this kind of methodological approach relates to other approaches found in the literature. I mean, I have not talked a lot about transition studies yet, but I think it's quite interesting also to see that Marco Heckert, so one of the TIS pioneers, in his very first TIS function papers, he also mentioned that it might be useful to engage with the sequence analysis. He also cited Andrew Abbott back then, but apparently this quantitative version of a sequence analysis that never went mainstream in the field, which I think could be changed, it should be changed in the future. It's kind of, if you think about it, also very similar to a more qualitative approach that can be found in the literature on regional path development. So there's this very helpful paper by Sutarauta and Krilic that has been published last year on path tracing and process tracing, which is kind of, if you think about it, a qualitative version of that quantitative sequence analysis, basically helping you to understand why changes in regional development happen. And then they allow us to study that in more detail. And here, I think it's a very nice opportunity to link these two concepts. For example, doing a quantitative sequence analysis as a first step, and then selecting unique or very interesting sequencing patterns that you can then continue to study in a case study design using a path tracing approach. In the last webinar, there was this very nice slide by Gesa Pflitsch on the idea of a process ontology, and then trying to distinguish different types of process ontologies. So how can different process theorizing styles maybe be put into these very kind of simple types? And here, I think it's kind of helpful also to then relate to that talk of Gesa from the last webinar. Here, of course, it's that these geographical sequence analysis that we put forward mainly relates to these linear and parallel processing theorizing styles, while it is not that good in handling the more recursive and conjunctive theorizing styles that you might use for that, the transition topology that Gesa has presented in the last webinar, which then is more able to handle these kind of feedback loops also. So now, how can we use sequence analysis to study transformative knowledge in regions? First, key prerequisite is, of course, we need to find a way of measuring transformative knowledge. And there I already look very much forward to the next talk by Tjaša and Nika. Then for the quantitative version, of course, you need a sufficient panel size. So this kind of task only helps you if you have, let's say, more than 100 observations and let's say more than 15 periods of time. And you can use it, the territory-based version that I showed you, to study, for example, how transformative knowledge in regions has changed over time. So use that on the regional level, but also on the entity-based level. So basically here you could think about using knowledge as a unit of observation, and then you can use the entity-based version that you can read in the paper by Andreas Kübert in Research Policy to then see maybe how transformative knowledge has diffused over time. And I think in that sense, GCA is a very helpful tool for research on transformative knowledge because it does not require continuous variables. So transformative knowledge is, of course, it's not only hard to define, it's also hard to measure. It might be in many cases not possible really to put a number on it, but it might be possible to assign a state or a factor variable to that. So here I think it can be very useful to study these more, I don't want to say fuzzy concepts, but concepts that are difficult to put in like metric numbers. Now for the last 2 minutes, I will provide a short glimpse into the ongoing paper I do on the bioeconomy regions, where in a very broad definition, I think bioeconomy innovations can be used as an indicator for transformative knowledge. So the bioeconomy and its innovation, they are found to have, this effect on transformative change in several sectors. So I think using that as I said again, broad definition, it somehow relates to the transformative idea of that network also. And it's more or less then what you can do to track maybe transformative change that is oriented towards bioeconomy. So what we do in the paper with, especially with my colleague Lukas Krisch, he identified bioeconomy content in geocoded pattern data using a natural language processing approach. So kind of large language models that we train to find the bioeconomy. We then link this data to functional urban areas, which are labor market regions in OECD countries across the world. And we have a data set then of like 16 million geocoded patterns. About 10% of that relate to the bioeconomy. And, based on that, we built basically a panel data set of like 600 regions for about 30 years. And for each region, we try to understand how the pattern portfolio that relates to the bioeconomy has changed over time. This is how you can kind of see the share of bioeconomy patterns has been more or less stable over time. All right, so we come up for that paper with a very easy typology. I don't want to go into detail here, but basically we distinguish between non-bio regions and regions that at least engage into bioeconomy innovation to some extent, where we have hidden bio regions, emerging bio regions, and leading bio regions that you can distinguish based on the number of patterns, on the comparative advantage in patterns, and also on the Shannon index, which is kind of a diversification and concentration measure. And then you can, for each region, see over time how that bioregion status basically has changed over time. And here I plotted some regions that are close to Giessen, which can tell us a bit about how the bioeconomy content in the pattern portfolio has evolved over time. This is how our preliminary results look so far. So we have a very interesting clusters 4 and 5 based on our sequence analysis, where we see that regions have become oriented a bit more towards the bioeconomy. There's a lot of new leading bioeconomy regions across the globe that we now want to look into more detail with like a further analysis. And this is what I think, to sum up, what sequence analysis can really help us with. So we can use it as a starting point and then combine it with more traditional methods, for example, case study designs, selecting individual regions, or also then combining it with econometric techniques, for example, in regression analysis. And that's for it. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sebastian, for the insightful presentation. So as there will be the breakout rooms later, I suggest that we pass the second presentation for today by Nika and Tjaša, and the floor is yours.
So today, me and Tjaša will try to shortly present our little experiment that we have been working on. And later on in the breakout room, we would also like to ask you to participate in it. So first, just a second. If I start by explaining why have we even decided to work on this topic. Well, transformative knowledge was this new and still very much evolving concept that we found very interesting, and especially so in the light of all the needed sustainability transitions. And this is why, despite the fact that the discussions about the conceptualization of transformative knowledge are still in their beginnings, our idea was to try and approach this from another side and explore the possibilities for its measurement and thereby add a quantitative perspective. Of course, this is a very experimental attempt for now, as we are trying here to measure a concept in parallel with the development of its first definitions. But still, we believe that the measurement could give a different and a valuable insight also into the theoretical discussions, and that it could also provide an insight into where a country or a region stands, where it is going, and how far it is from its goal, which could be, of course, a valuable information also for the policymakers. As well as it could provide the basis for further development of the measurements by other researchers. So our objective is to develop a new index to measure the transformative knowledge potential of regions. Why an index? Because indices are very appropriate actually to measure such complex phenomena, as they can merge many different indicators into just one number or ranking, which is very easy to communicate and also to understand. And this is why indices are also quite popular. So now if we have a look at how we approached the development of this index, first important thing is that we followed the OECD's handbook on constructing composite indicators. The basic steps are presented here in this picture. So, of course, also when we are developing an index, first we need some theoretical framework. Then we need to select the appropriate data. We have decided to use data which are already available. Why? Because, of course, applying a tailored survey in different regions and on a large sample would take really a lot of time and, of course, budget that we did not have. And also, since this was more of an experiment, it seemed reasonable to first try and search different existing databases from reliable sources and try to find if what is there that would best fit our needs for the moment. Then we have also already performed some basic analysis of this data, and we already presented some summary statistics on the RSA conference in Ljubljana. We have also already received some relevant feedback and suggestions about which additional indicators should we consider. And in line with the possibilities, of course, the data availability, we have already adapted slightly our initial set of indicators. So now we come to the next very important step that we would like to perform today. So what we would like to do together with your help is we would like to assign appropriate weights to different selected indicators. And based on the results, it's possible that some additional indicators will be removed from the index, but at this stage, no additional indicators will be added. And only then other statistical methods come into place, but we are not there yet. So if I explain a little bit the first step that we have performed, and this is the theoretical framework. As I said, we started our work somewhat in parallel with the development of the first definition of the concept that you can also see here on the slide. This definition was actually developed by our colleagues Anna, Luis, Uk, and Jesper, and was also presented on the annual conference in Ljubljana last year. Some of the main elements of this definition that we have also tried to capture in our measurement as much as possible, of course, are that transformative knowledge is the driver of societal change, that the combination of micro and system level innovation, which are valued in society, is needed, that it evolves in participatory multi-actor context, that the knowledge generation is action-oriented, and that it is characterized by experimenting, implementing, diffusing, and also institutionalizing, all, of course, in response to grand challenges. And since there was not really any existing literature on transformative knowledge concept, we have, of course, also not found any existing measure of transformative knowledge or transformative knowledge potential. We have decided to develop an input index. Why is that? This is firstly because according to theory on indices, there is a basic rule that input and output indicators cannot be put together, mixed together in one index. And also our objective was to measure the potential of regions. And potential in this way actually means the resources that are needed for the development of transformative knowledge. And when we have resources in an index, this is then typically an example of an input index. This is also why we are talking about the transformative knowledge potential index and not just transformative knowledge. The input index also seemed relevant to us from the policy-making point of view, since it can show policymakers in which direction we need to go in order to achieve better results. And last but not least, there was also, to be honest, more data available that could somehow easier be associated with transformative knowledge potential, so the inputs. There are, of course, also some available data related to outputs, but it is also somehow more difficult to claim that different outputs or results, like, for example, cleaner environment, is the consequence of transformative knowledge and not, in fact, the consequence of many other factors. So according to what we had known about transformative knowledge concept by that point, we started gathering data for the index around 3 basic pillars or dimensions that you also see here below. So the first pillar measures the current state of knowledge. The second pillar here represents human values. And the third pillar measures the potential of the environment for creating knowledge in relation to innovation and also engagement of people. Now, if I explain a bit further why we have included human values, there is a vast theory here, of course, that suggests that human values shape individuals' attitudes, intentions, and also their behavior. And in relation to transformative knowledge, this would mean that the values would shape not only how people feel towards the transformations and how motivated they are, for example, to build their knowledge on this topic, but also how likely it is for them to take action. So to use their acquired knowledge to participate in these transformations. For example, if people do not share values according to which all people deserve a decent living, they are, of course, also less likely to put their effort towards activities and changes which would help achieve this goal. So this is why we felt it's important to include all these 3 pillars into the index. Recommended minimum is that each pillar or each dimension here should have at least 3 different indicators, but the good practice is actually to have at least 5 to 7 indicators. And now Tjaša will tell you more about which indicators have we selected.
So we will start with the first pillar. This is the current state of knowledge, which indicates the immediate capability to participate and contribute to knowledge-based activities. We measure the formal education with the percent of population with tertiary to primary education. Then we have the job-related knowledge, which is acquired through the hands-on experience. This is measured with percent of high-skilled to low-skilled workers. The third measure, which is the concentration of fields of tertiary education, measures the diversity of knowledge, because we believe that it is important to have diverse knowledge in order to respond to the grand challenges we are facing. And then we have also 2 measures on how proactive approach to knowledge acquisition commitment to stay up to date the population has. And this is measured by participation rate in adult learning and percent of employees participating in continuous vocational training. A new indicator which we found since the RSA conference in Ljubljana is measuring the digital skills, and this one is measured on with the percent of individuals with above basic overall digital skills. This is measured by reported by the Eurostat, and it measures a wide variety of digital skills from information and data literacy skills, communication and collaboration skills, digital content creation, and so on. So a wide variety of digital skills. So this is our first pillar, measuring the current state of knowledge. Then, as Nika already mentioned, the second pillar covers the human values. And these are the values which are crucial for fostering innovation, collaboration, and societal well-being in region. So the 3 values, according to the Schwartz theory of basic values that contribute to that, are the self-direction, which refers to the value placed on the independent thought and action. We found information for that in the European Social Survey, and it's based on questions that it's important to think new ideas and be creative, and it's important to make own decisions and be free. The second human value emphasizes understanding, appreciation, tolerance, and protection of the welfare for all people and for the nature. This is based on questions that it's important that people are treated equally and have equal opportunities, that it's important to understand different people, and that it's important to care for nature and environment. The last human value is closely related to universalism, and it's called benevolence. And this one centers on preserving and enhancing the welfare of those with whom one is in frequent personal contact. And it's based on questions that it's important to help and care for others' well-being, and it's important to be loyal to friends and devote to people close to us. So universalism and benevolence actually differ in the sense that universalism is that we care for all people and for the nature, whereas the benevolence stresses only the importance of caring for those who we are in close contact. The last pillar of our index measures the potential for creating knowledge. So it basically evaluates the future capacity for innovation, knowledge creation, and engagement. So we measure the investments into the research and development by an indicator gross domestic R&D expenditures. Then we measure investments into the workforce development, which is crucial for sustaining innovation, with the percent of enterprises providing training for their staff. We also included active to inactive population ratio. So that's the number of working persons and those who are available for work, divided by the inactive population of the same age. And this gives us a sense on the pool of individuals who are available and capable of engaging in knowledge creation, research, and innovation. And then we have two slightly different indicators. One is the perceived political participation, which is measured with the agreement with the statements that a political system allows people to have a say in what government does. So each respondent was asked to answer this question regarding their political system. And the second question is the political system allows people to have influence on politics. This indicator was identified because political systems influence innovation ecosystems or environments for creating knowledge. And then the last indicator that we have is the political and civic engagement, which measures the share of people who have voted, who have signed petition, participated in political party, demonstration, and so on. And it basically reflects society's openness to new ideas and reforms, and also provides some avenues for active participation and knowledge creation. So we now have 14 different indicators. And we already showed some summary statistics on them at the RSI conference, and for the sake of brevity, I'm going to skip these graphs. So this is just where we are today, but what we want to talk about in this workshop and what we would like for you to participate in later on is we have 14 indicators, and what we need to do is we need to apply one number to 14 indicators. So kind of something like Sebastian mentioned before that we cannot do, but that's what we are actually trying to do. So we want to make an executive summary of our indicators for policymakers. And in order to do that, we need to put weights on each of the indicators in order to sum them up. And these weights are actually value judgments, and they impact the composite index and the country rating. So the results of what transformative knowledge of one region is. So we need to be very careful what kind of weighting we choose. So in order to see the impacts of different weighting techniques, we have chosen to select 4 which we believe are the most appropriate for this type of index. And then we'll do the sensitivity analysis to these different weighting techniques. So let me briefly describe these 4 identified weighting techniques. The first one is equal weighting, and it's quite simple. Basically, it assigns the same weight to all indicators in the composite index, and it implies that all variables are equally important. The negative side of such weighting is that it can lead to an unbalanced structure of the 3 pillars in the composite index, as the pillars might have unequal weights due to an unequal number of indicators. Also, there is a possibility that we'll have a double counting if there is a high degree of correlation among different variables, among different indicators, especially in each specific pillar. So in order to correct for this correlation, we can use the principal component analysis or the factor analysis, where we correct for overlapping information. However, we can come into the situation where we have 2 correlated indicators which are measuring 2 different aspects of transformative knowledge, and we actually don't want to correct for that correlation. For example, % of employees who are participating in conditional vocational training and measures basically this proactive approach of the workforce in the first pillar, so in the current state of knowledge, is highly is probably quite correlated with the percent of enterprises providing training for their staff, which is potential for creating knowledge, as it measures the investments into the workforce. It's kind of like a difference between supply and demand. So on one hand, we have those, we are measuring in the first pillar how many of them are acquiring knowledge, and in the third pillar, we are measuring what are possibilities for them to acquire knowledge, even perhaps they are not doing that. So that's why we decided also to include two other possible weighting techniques. One is the budget allocation approach. There is where in this weighting, the experts assign weights to indicators. So each expert gets a budget of 100 points, and then these points need to be, so this budget of 100 points needs to be distributed across indicators. For example, first you need to divide them across the 3 different pillars, then you'll get another 100 points that you need to divide across the indicators in the first pillar, and then 100 in the second pillar, and so on. Then you take the average of these weights, and that's how you get the average of the budget, and that's how you get the weights of each indicator in the composite index. And then the last one is the analytic hierarchy process, which was already mentioned today. In this case, the experts make pairwise comparisons of indicators. So they need to decide, for example, between, if we're talking about pillars, the current state of knowledge and human values, and then they say whether they believe that these two pillars are equally important, or in what degree they believe that one of the pillars is more important than the other. Such weights are a bit less sensitive to errors in judgment. As you will probably see later on, it's quite hard to decide where to put those 100 points, and it's much easier to say just, I believe that this indicator is much more important than that it's 23 points more important than the other. So that's basically everything. So that's the short description of the weighting techniques that we are considering.
Okay. So in the next step, we will apply different weighting methods. And for that, we would really need your help today. So this is why we would like to invite you to the breakout room where we would like you to help us with two of the weighting methods that Tjaša has presented. One method is budget allocation approach, and here you have already an example of a question. Again, what you need to do here is just distribute the budget between different sub-indices or indicators. But yes, again, it's not actually as easy as it might seem at first. So here, this is our last slide. You have the link and the QR code to the questionnaire. And if you decide to join us, you can already try to access the questionnaire on your computer or on your phone. But just access it. Do not start filling it in already, because in the breakout room, we would like to go through the questionnaire together with you and help you again by explaining some indicators if needed. So maybe also if you are not live and you are actually watching this video, you are also invited to fill in the questionnaire if you are able to. It will be open for a couple more weeks, and it will be valuable to us. So much from us for now. If you have any questions or feedback, if we have time, it is welcome, of course. But please, we would like to ask you not to state your opinion on specific indicators for now, because we don't want your opinion to influence the opinion of others before they fill in the questionnaire today. Thank you, and we apologize again for the technical issues.
Thank you very much, Nika and Tjaša, for the inspiring talk. And we will go on with the second part of this webinar.
Okay, so I see that we are all back now in the main room. Well, I hope you had nice breakout discussions. I think we have some room now to, follow up on those. And I think I'll just start by asking each moderator in each room to give us a short summary about what was discussed there. Maybe Maria, can you give us some insights?
Yes, it was a very interesting discussion going on, mostly around what are the data, what is this method, and the nature of these methods, the nature of the data that are used, and the applications of it. That it's about this special case was about employment data, but there could be several other data sets used. It is case specific, the definition of the states, and it is able this method to be combined with a variety of explanatory methods. And we talked about what is an event, how to define an event, and that it depends on the research question. And and of course that other studies, previous studies from other fields, that they had this type of analysis, that they brought this type of analysis that can be like animal geography or spatial research like movement of people over time and politics, political science. But there were a lot of insights on how to use in future and other type of data sets. It's enough to have a panel data set. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Maria. Judith, you want to tell something?
Yes, we had quite an exciting session, being able to do votes and weighting. So initially we discussed a little bit what additional indicators could be taken into the survey, but now since the two are testing their models and doing the weighting, we said, okay, this is just the indicator set that's available, and also it's a core aspect of reliability and availability of data across regions. So not, for example, a cooperative register is not available for whole Europe, for example. So you can't just simply take this data and put it into the index. I find you should all try this weighting schemes. So it's really a very interesting experience. And it's not so easy to do, but you will see yourself. So basically, but Nika, anybody of you, I think you would like to do a little bit marketing for others to join this experience. So I would
thank you. We appreciate also all the marketing from you to your colleagues. We need, of course, as much answers as possible. And as I said before, for us, it's valuable if you come, even if you cover just a specific dimension, specific fields. It doesn't have to be that you're acquainted with all different fields. So every survey filled in counts for us, and we'll be thankful, and it will be open for a while. And as I said before, I saw now that Anna is also here, and maybe Luis, if we can distribute, if we send you the link, and I think it's feasible that it's the request to fill out the questionnaire is distributed within the network at least. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a very nice exercise. I think we'll be happy to help you spread the news and to see what comes out of it.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Well, I think we have some room now for open discussion. I wonder if anybody wants to take the stage and ask a question to our speakers. Yes, Judith, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So thanks for these very interesting presentations. I found both very interesting because I love methods, and I think you have both. You're trying to develop new approaches that actually better help us cope with what we do not know about transformative knowledge. My major concern is with this term, and I think we are all struggling with it because it's still so vague. And if you do measurement, you need to operationalize things, which I find with this very broad and vague definition a little bit difficult sometimes. So I think you both try to approach this with what you have done actually, but maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience, what from your perspective with your specific method would be necessary in order to better allow measuring than transformative knowledge. I know this is quite a holistic question, but nevertheless.
Yeah, we actually struggled with that. I mean, because we even didn't have this broad definition when we started working on it. So we had this first workshop, and we had a bunch of ideas what could this transformative knowledge would be. And I think that by trying also now to measure it, it's going to a bit other way around, you know, because we are putting in indicators and then we have people saying, yeah, but transformative knowledge is not just that. We should also measure this type of indicators. So perhaps this will also help us to better operationalize the transformative knowledge itself.
It helped the two of us to better understand what transformative knowledge is supposed to be about, because it's a different way of thinking, and this is why we found it interesting to say, okay, we are saying big words about this concept, but how to measure it, what is it really? Yeah, so, but of course this is why we have so many limitations in this measurement. This is completely clear to us. It's a process.
Maybe Sebastian, you want to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's the easier part because I did not attempt to measure transformative knowledge, but I just said, okay, once someone else found the measure, there's this method of sequence analysis that you can then use to measure it. And I mean, so I'm at the easier part in that sense, but the maybe message that comes from that is that there are methods around like sequence analysis where you don't have to put a continuous number on a thing that might be very difficult to measure. So maybe there's ways to, you know, measure a type of knowledge or specify different types of transformative knowledge without putting it in an indicator that maybe a lot of people might disagree with. And in that sense, I think sequence analysis can be very helpful then for studying transformative knowledge, because it is able to handle data that is like factor-based and not continuous. But yeah, as I said, the hard part there is for Nika and Tjaša and not on me.
Thank you. Juk?
Yes, continuing this discussion, I really think that on the one hand, as you said, Sebastian, you have a tool that we have to feed in with indicators actually. So it's a general tools, and the big issue is how what we are going to feed in your model. And on the other hand, we have the question asked by Tjaša and Nika. And Nika and Tjaša stick with what exists as data, and I perfectly understand. But actually, we also postulate a shift in the perspective with transformative knowledge region. And that means that it's very probable that indicators are not yet there to find what transformative knowledge is. And for me, I'm not a really quantitative guy, so it's very difficult for me. But if I ask a more qualitative question on indicators, would be more actually, we are used to use indicator of input and output in innovation. So R&D as input and output, so patents and just very caricatural, but it's always the indicators of innovations. or education as input, and so on and so forth. And actually, transformative knowledge is more about what is in between input and output, and what happens. And maybe it is important maybe to find indicators that of that process in between inputs and outputs. I don't know what are the agencies and who are the agencies. And I propose, for instance, indicators like for social innovations, or the number of associations, maybe more than enterprises or firms, or I don't know, more indications about people making things and who are not knowledge intensive, but makers, so more vocational, or I don't know if it's vocational, but all these types. And that are in the making, and what do I don't know. So it's a very general question that I would like to ask to people who are more better than I on this question.
I think, Nika, your hand is on. You have a reaction?
I had some problems unmuting us. Well, yeah, actually, our reaction was to Sebastian's comment. So as far as I don't know if I understood your method correctly, but you kind of need you cannot have multiple indicators and then plugging it into the sequence analysis. You kind of need one indicator, if I kind of got it correctly, yeah. So that find it as in some way problematic using sequence analysis without kind of constructing some kind of a composite index. And then, of course, very much so in different composite indicators that are constructed, indices that are constructed, you don't use that actual value. So you don't say, I don't know, the transformative knowledge potential is 35, because this doesn't tell you anything by itself. So you either rank the regions, or you can say in the upper quarter, or in the lowest 20% or something like that. And then you basically enter this categorical type of variables that then can be really good for the sequence analysis, I think.
Yeah, maybe I can reply to that and then also provide some insights for you on the second question then. So first, I mean, sequence analysis, you can also do it on like a combination then of different indicators. So that's also possible. You don't need to have that like only one variable, but you can of course combine several ones and then define the states based on that. So in the breakout room earlier, we also thought about how you could use it for like applying your indicator. And then one idea would be to, for example, track for some regions over time, maybe that one dimension within your composite indicator has evolved first in a specific region, and then the others kind of increase as well. So this is kind of a way I think it could be used. And then regarding the second question of Luke, so your idea that transformative knowledge is something in between input and output. I do not really agree 100% on that. I think there's a lot of input that is needed to provide transformative knowledge. And then in the end, you have transformative knowledge as an output. And then you have change that results from transformative knowledge output as an outcome. So I think it's even more like a spectrum of things that you then might think about trying to measure within the idea of transformative knowledge. And I think in that case, it's still, of course, it's then again limiting the idea of the concept and the definition. But still, I think you need to make this distinction. Are you talking about inputs to transformative knowledge? So what do regions, people, and so on need to come up with this transformative knowledge? And then also what are the outputs? So I mean, transformative knowledge can also just be measured as transformative once there's change happening, or once there's something that leads you to assume that that knowledge will lead to transformative change in a way. So yeah, I get your point, but I think it's much more complicated than you described in your
If we can we just very shortly reflect? Sorry, you did.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So just so a response to Hugues and Sebastian. So I agree with Sebastian, and basically comparing, once we will be able to calculate like the input index and the output index, and then doing the comparison of those using, for example, spatial econometric kind of regressions. These differences in changes in the input index and how it reflects in an output index can then actually tells us about something about the process itself. How good it is or how efficient it is to come from the inputs to the transformative knowledge to the outputs of the transformative knowledge. And now, Julie, to you, that was just our short intermezzo.
Great, thank you. I think picking up on Hugues' statement on we need more like indicators that we have in social innovation. To be honest, I'm working on social innovation very much and trying to measure it in its impact, and we are lacking indicators that are appropriate. So we are actually at the moment developing a new impact measurement model at the sort of a meta concept. And it's quite hard because you have all this sort, but nevertheless, I fully agree with you that we probably need, after this initial round of measurement and weighting, I think we should carefully consider to add further indicators which are available across regions. I find the one indicator you have in there in your indicators already is the engagement, political and I think civic engagement was it. I think that goes into the right direction, but we could also look at, for example, cooperatives, as Hugues said earlier today. That would be great, and I feel one could also look, because this is also data which is available across Europe, is when you look into the social enterprise monitor, which has been now kept, I think, 2 times. That could also be then for the future, then not for now, but for the future, give you some indications on where change is happening. And my last point is that, and we see that in social innovation too, is that we really need to account for the context, and we surely should have some indicators in your measure, in your composite indicator, basically giving us information on the specific context, on the political institutional context, and also on the societal climate per se, would be, I think, quite relevant. I don't know where to get this data, because we usually collect this data. I think there is no European database on that, much to my regret, but nevertheless, I think we should need to carefully consider this too.
We agree. Each idea that we get, we check it. Unfortunately, there is usually some problem with data. But of course, any new idea is welcome. I think we tried at least a little bit to address the political context with the
perceived political participation. So based on the questions, how they believe that the political system allows them to have a say.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I think we have to get to a close now. Well, the discussion was getting even better now, but I think we have to move on. Well, to keep the discussion going, I would like to give the word to Jesper Maniš, because well, we cannot solve all the issues, all the conceptual methodological issues now on what transformative knowledge actually is and how can it be measured. But we hope to keep the discussion going next October. So maybe Jesper, do you want to say something about how we are planning the forthcoming session?
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, I want to share my screen now. I just want to say a few words. Can you see it?
Yes.
Want to say a few words about what we did not progress the planning in exact detail of it, but it's taking place on the island of Bornholm in the Baltic Sea, in the middle of the Baltic Sea, and it's a part of Denmark. It is the second workshop in the TRAKR workshop or the network. And we, from the beginning, said that the main focus of this could be the empirical results and case studies after having discussed first the conceptual issues and now also some methodological issues. We would focus maybe on some empirical results. There is also another focus possible that we, as a network, maybe would try to organize a special issue on transformative knowledge. That is not finally decided, but it could be very probable that such an issue could be realized. Yeah, then a special content on this particular event could be the occasion of meeting on Bornholm, which is, as I said, in the middle of the Baltic Sea. It is for the first one of a big tourist destination, but that is not the reason why it is interesting in this. It is more that it's also now in the middle of very strategic and very ambitious plans for not only Denmark, but also for the other Baltic Sea regions to build wind parks and also other kinds of infrastructures, power to X technologies that transfer this electricity into other, for instance, hydrogen. And there is plan to make a big infrastructure. As you know, maybe remember last year there was a big still unresolved catastrophic bombing in the middle of the sea, this Russian pipelines for gas. But a similar infrastructure is maybe on its way. But Bornholm is part of Danish plans to build a big energy island, what is called, and that of course gives a lot of opportunities for the local development, and visit to see some of these things or to invite some of these people working with it is of course also a part of the idea of having it on Bornholm. Transport is, of course, a little more complicated than going to Copenhagen, because you first have to go to Copenhagen and then to take either the flight. There are several departures every day, and it's not extremely expensive. It is affordable. Very small aeroplane, 50 minutes, no, 30 minutes only. But there is also a ferry connection, or you can also take your car and go, but then you will need this ferry. And last, I could tell that the host of this is where I work. It's a small independent research center. We are only in total 15 in our staff. And here on Bornholm, it's only half of that number. The rest is working in Copenhagen, where we also have a little satellite office. But they are working more with the modeling. They are all economists and data experts, while we here on Bornholm have more to do with qualitative research, studying now in recent years also this energy transitioning, and with a focus often on peripheral areas. But you would be very, very welcome to register for this event. And yeah, we look forward to see all of you.
Thank you very much, Jesper. I think you gave us a very nice glimpse about what we can expect when visiting Bornholm. I also hope that most of us can be there. I'll be for sure. And well, I think it's now time to come to a close. I'd like to thank on behalf of the organizers to all the participants, to the speakers, to the chairs, and also, of course, to Nika and Alex, who have been on the background to make sure that the session was running smoothly. And well, I hope to meet you very soon in the next event, or in the next RSA event. We'll have a forthcoming conference in Florence. I'm sure I'll see many of you there. So I wish you the rest of a good day and see you soon.